Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're looking at a pretty fascinating collision between two completely different worlds. On one side, we have this viral, internet-fueled dream of entirely escaping the rat race. And on the other, the hard, empirical, psychological science of financial stress. We're going to unpack what it actually means to buy your freedom and, well, what the data says that pursuit might ultimately cost your mind. So I want you to imagine something just for a second. Exactly what would you do if you woke up tomorrow and literally never had to work another day in your life? I mean, what would your random Tuesday look like? Where would you even live? Now, for a rapidly growing community of people, this isn't just some idle daydream. It's actually a mathematically precise target. Okay, let's dive into this. The financial independence retire early or FIRE movement gained massive traction among millennials back in the 2010s, and it completely challenges the traditional timeline of working until you're 65. Because instead of relying on a standard pension or waiting around for official retirement age, practitioners focus on accumulating assets incredibly rapidly to generate passive income. They are effectively buying back their time decades in advance. But to pull this off, the math has to be incredibly aggressive. While your traditional financial planners typically recommend saving, maybe 10 to 15% of your income, FIRE practitioners aim to save a massive portion of their paycheck. We're talking sometimes up to 75%. By saving 75% of what you earn and living on the remaining quarter, which, let's be real, might mean a whole lot of rice and beans, the math shows you can actually accumulate enough to retire in under 10 years. And that's even ignoring investment growth. Let's move into Section 1, the mechanics of FIRE. Breaking down the math of early retirement. So to understand how everyday people make this extreme math actually work out, we have to look at something called the 4% rule. This was introduced by financial planner William Benjamin way back in 1994. The rule basically suggests that if you build an investment portfolio equal to 25 times your annual living expenses, you can safely withdraw 4% of it each and every year to live on. In theory, your investments are going to grow enough over time to sustain those long-term withdrawals indefinitely. Now, because personal finance is, highly personal, there isn't just one single way to do this. We actually see a vast variety of approaches to gaming the system, and these are often called the flavors of FIRE. First, you have lean FIRE, which relies on extreme frugality. Then there's fat FIRE, where you're aiming for a much larger nest egg to keep up a middle class or even wealthy lifestyle. There's coast FIRE, which is all about saving aggressively early on and then just letting compound interest do the heavy lifting for you. And finally, barista FIRE. This is essentially semi-retirement, where your day-to-day expenses are covered by modest withdrawals, but you take on lower stress part-time work specifically to get essential benefits. Section 2. Realities and roadblocks. The friction in the early retirement system. All right, we need to pull the rug out slightly here, because achieving this dream exposes people to massive systemic roadblocks. And this brilliantly illustrates the point. Look at the stark contrast in healthcare. In the United States, securing health insurance before Medicare kicks in at age 65 is incredibly challenging. Purchasing unsubsidized coverage on the Affordable Care Act exchange, that can cost an average of $1,116 per month for a 62-year-old. Compare that to early retirees in universal systems like the UK, Canada, or much of Western Europe. They don't face these extreme financial barriers, simply because their healthcare isn't tied to their employment status. And it's not just healthcare. American early retirees also have to navigate a maze of complex tax loopholes just to access their very own money. You see, tax-advantaged retirement accounts typically hit you with a 10% penalty if you withdraw a single dime before age 59 and a half. So FIRE practitioners have to rely on highly specific strategies. Things like setting up a Roth IRA conversion ladder, utilizing the Rule of 55, or taking 72T distributions. Think of these basically as IRS-approved legal escape hatches that let you top into your funds early without triggering massive fines. Which brings us to Section 3, the psychology of money, what science says about financial stress. To really grasp the reality of living on a razor-thin margin, we're turning to the Changing Cost of Living study. This was led by Daniel Nettle and a team of researchers, and it is absolutely incredible. They tracked panels of adults in France and the UK every single month for an entire year, from September 2022 to August 2023. What we have here is a real-time tracking of human mental health during a period of intensely high cost of living inflation, especially when it came to energy bills. So the researchers tracked a metric called the income-to-costs ratio, or ITC. To put it in plain English, this is the proportional relationship between your household income and your absolute, unavoidable essential costs. We're talking rent, water, energy. Just think for a second about that pit in your stomach when those essential bills suddenly outpace your paycheck. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the data mapped out here. The trend lines for clinical anxiety and depression spike incredibly aggressively as financial stability drops. When people had worse income to cost ratios than their usual baseline, they were measurably more anxious and depressed than usual. It's a direct correlation. The researchers were actually able to separate income drops from cost spikes, and they made a profound discovery. Simply having your rent or your energy bill spike, even if your income stays exactly the same, triggers immediate depressive symptoms. It acts as an exogenous shock, an uncontrollable external blow right to your mental health. And we really need to emphasize that word immediate. Financial anxiety isn't always this slow, long-term buildup over years of poverty. The studies showed that short-term fluctuations have instant mental health consequences. The psychological impact happens the very month you have to start scraping by and worrying about making ends meet. Section 4. The true cost of freedom. When the FIRE solution becomes a psychological problem. This is where our two sources come together with a really profound irony. You see, the FIRE lifestyle inherently requires intense frugality. But that exact frugality exposes you to the very cost fluctuations that clinical data shows cause severe distress. So to escape this, many practitioners turn to something called geographic arbitrage. This means packing up and moving from a high-cost area to a lower-cost area. Popular spots are places like Mexico, Thailand, or Portugal. People are often taking massive pay cuts or relying on a much smaller portfolio just to get a better quality of life in a place where housing and healthcare are a fraction of the cost. But we absolutely cannot ignore the psychological data here. Those same researchers also measured social support. This is defined as the actual or expected instrumental and emotional assistance you get from your social network. The study looked closely at how having your friends and family nearby impacts your well-being during those times of acute financial stress. So the crucial point is this. The researchers found a massive buffer. People with moderate or strong social circles were entirely protected from the depression spikes caused by a bad financial month. The increasing depression associated with a financially worse than usual month was completely restricted to the group that had low social support. Your community literally acts as a psychological shield. Which creates what we can call the geographic paradox. On the one hand, yes, moving abroad dramatically lowers your essential costs and it relieves financial strain. But on the other hand, a major reported drawback of geo-arbitrage is the sheer distance from your family and your existing social networks. By moving away, you dramatically lower your primary psychological buffer against depression. Think about it. You might just be trading financial stress for dangerous isolation. Let's move to the next point and see how this builds. Because what does this tell us? Trying to game the financial system totally alone, using extreme frugality or relocating thousands of miles away, leaves you highly vulnerable to both economic shocks and psychological distress. True financial freedom isn't just a spreadsheet hitting a 4% withdrawal rate. It actually requires both an income buffer and a community buffer. So, we want to leave you with this. The data is crystal clear that our mental health is intimately tied to both our financial margin and the people we surround ourselves with. So if our true well-being relies on having both financial stability and social support, is retiring early, totally alone and on a razor-tight budget really the ultimate freedom? Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer, and we'll see you next time.